Hello everybody and welcome. I'm Paul Morton and I'm the CEO of Lannock Strata Finance. Thank you for coming. The fact that so many people are here tonight I think is indicative that this is an important issue and one which requires some really careful consideration, so thank you for that. I acknowledge the traditional owners of this land and their elders past and present, and I'd also like to acknowledge some of the sponsors. Obviously Lannock Strata Finance is one of the sponsors tonight, but these events cost money, it takes effort and time, and I'd particularly like to thank Solutions IE and their CEO Ross Daley, and also CHU for contributing to the expenses tonight, which is obviously very important. Personally, I'd like to make a particular point of thanking Joel Handler from Lannock and Peter Berney from Solutions IE. Without their very hard work, we would not be here. We all know it's an important topic, and it's not for me to talk about it, so I'd like Ross Daley to come up. He will be guiding us through this session. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul, and welcome everyone. I should let you know the bathrooms are out past the elevator. If there's a fire, follow me, because I'll be running, knocking people out of the way to the fire exit. And can I also ask that you check that your mobile phone is on silent, because we all know how embarrassing it is when the phone rings during someone's presentation. So thank you everyone for coming along tonight. Solutions in Engineering is really pleased to partner with Lannock Finance and also CHU to put on this evening. It's great that so many people are here. I'd like to start by introducing the panel. Some people won't need any introduction with the amount of publicity that they do on their Twitter, Facebook and LinkedIn profiles, but I'll do that anyway. So first of all, there's Peter Berney, who's the National Business Development Manager for the organisation that I lead, so Solutions in Engineering. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Ross.
Next to Peter is a gentleman who needs no introduction to the strata industry, Simon Barnard, who is here in his capacity as President of SCA Queensland. Next to Simon is Jason Carlson, who's a partner at Grace Lawyers, but also a board member of SCA Queensland. Next to Jason is Andrew Brennan, who is a fire engineer. So he's the guy that's got all of the answers to all of the questions that no one else on the panel knows the answers to. So no pressure at all, Andrew, that you'll have all of the answers to the questions that none of us can answer. And next to Andrew is Kim Jonnson, who's the State Manager for CHU Insurance. And down the end is Paul Ramage, who is representing the Office of the Strata Communities Commission for the Queensland Government. So Paul, thank you for coming along. We are going to make your inaugural industry event as easy as possible for you. So the proceedings this evening, what I'm going to do is actually guide us through a number of questions. I'm not quite Tony Jones or Virginia Trioli, so if you can please have your patience with me. So I'd like to open up the first question to the panel and say, should we be really concerned about this issue with fire cladding? Who's first up?
I'll take that one, Ross. Look, fire risk is present, it's ever present. Fortunately, in this state, we have really good fire safety regulations and acts to protect us, and our fire safety installations are there to help protect our property and get us to a place of safety. These installations should be checked regularly to make sure they're maintained. Interestingly, there was a panel discussion similar to this in Sydney recently, where one of the panellists suggested that perhaps 8 out of 10 buildings in that state would have issues with regard to the systems. Another point with regard to fire safety, of course, is our fire and evacuation or evacuation practice, which is a mandatory requirement in this state, must be conducted at least every 12 months. And if you take into consideration all these things, they're there to protect us and get us to a place of safety, with or without the cladding.
Thanks, Peter.
Look, SCA Queensland's been working for a number of years with the Queensland Government on this very topic. Certainly within Queensland, the Minister's Office has advised us, even as of today, there are very few buildings that have been identified in Queensland, which is a direct result of the product only being available up here between 1994 and 2004. Of those very few limited buildings that have been identified, they're also pleased to say that very few need rectification. So whilst this is an issue certainly nationally and around the world, I think some proactive measures a few years ago in Queensland have made it not such an issue up here for us.
Okay. Jason.
Look, of course, a body corporate should be concerned about fire risk. There's a lot of things that a body corporate should be concerned about, but stakeholders and particularly advisors to bodies corporate should be more concerned if there isn't just records and evidence of due diligence being conducted by these bodies corporate to provide those assurances to those that are stakeholders within these buildings.
Andrew, the man that has all of the answers.
Yeah, so definitely cladding is a risk in terms of the buildings we have in Queensland and across Australia. In terms, it must be looked at though in the round in terms of what kind of building you have. Does your building have sprinklers? Is it a high-rise building? How many stairs do you have from that building? So it's not a matter of just looking at the cladding in isolation. It's about looking at the overall fire risk assessment for the building and understanding the overall issues that you need to address, and ensuring that you've got appropriate provisions in place.
Okay, thank you. And Kim, the word risk must come up in every second sentence that you mention at work each day?
Yes, I'm a very exciting person to talk to at a barbecue. I guess when we look at is there an issue, the two things that we've taken into consideration are primarily what Peter said about legislation, evacuation procedures, minimum requirements in Australia, and then what you've said as far as the height of the building, and there's a number of factors. So there are some buildings where this is going to be an issue and it's going to consume them, but that is not the majority of buildings. It's probably more in the minority.
Okay, thank you, Kim. And Paul.
Lucky last.
Lucky last.
What they said. Well, effectively for the body, I'm Commissioner of Body Corporate. What my role is effectively is to actually gather all the information so that everybody gets the same information. I think part of the issue is the confusion of where to go to get the up-to-date information, and that's what I'm gathering. So my members here and the colleagues, I'll actually be collating a lot more evidence. I'll actually be doing what you're doing, taking notes to gather that information and make sure that we contribute that across the board so that when body corporate managers are actually making decisions, or body corporates are making decisions, they're effective and they're informative.
Okay, thank you, Paul. So, Peter, everyone is aware of the Grenfell tragedy. Terrible set of circumstances, and we need to take steps to ensure that that never happens again. And I think that, you know, there's been action, and the reason we've got so many people here this evening is in part in response to that tragedy. I'm just wondering, when you read media reports, you would think that every second building is affected by this. You know, like, have we got thousands of buildings in Australia that are affected by this as an issue?
Yeah, that's the state of modern media, isn't it? There's that every 5 minutes they need a soundbite or something to talk about on the news because it's 24/7. Look, we don't know if there's thousands of buildings that have cladding or not, and the only way to find that out would be to sit down and rationally go through and look at things, do some reports to find out if there's cladding. If there is cladding, is it flammable? If it is flammable, is there an issue with the fire safety installations working in harmony with that? So I think we need a calm, cautious approach to looking at how many buildings do have the cladding.
Okay, thank you. And Jason, if a building does have cladding, is time running out for the owners in that building to do something about it?
Well, there's two parts to that question. Time will certainly have run out for the building to do something meaningful about it if the worst would happen. And the only way you can militate against that risk is by conducting due diligence and discovering a defect before it discovers you. But if you were to discover a defect before the worst happens, there's no sunset date by which all Queenslanders need to make a claim for defective cladding. Instead, there are general principles in which guide when a particular body corporate, for example, could make a claim for defective cladding, but it changes from case to case. The rule of thumb is generally 6 years from practical completion of the building for one type of legal action. that can be taken as an example. But the difficulty that you fundamentally get is, when does, for example, that 6-year period run for a particular building, and how do you discern the start date for it? So again, it would be, if you do find defective cladding within one of your buildings, it's taking specialist advice from the best in the industry about how you militate the risks that presents as a sort of global building-wide fire safety solution. And then, is there anyone else that we can point the finger at to help us foot the bill?
So a follow-on question, Jason. I'm just wondering, there's lots of body corporate managers here, so professionals working in the industry. As a lawyer that would see issues coming up with bodies corporate all the time, what advice would you give to the people that are in the room that are working with a number of buildings that may not know whether there's cladding in place? When it comes to what do we do when they're asked the question, what would a body corporate manager who's here tonight, what would be the best thing they could do to ensure that they've got all of their ducks lined up when it comes to potentially an issue down the track?
Well, it's just generally a question of raising awareness for those within your portfolio. The days of a body corporate manager being a pen pusher and just providing a very basic administrative or secretarial service are unfortunately well past us. Bodies corporate managers are more taking the role of trusted advisors, and a very key part of that function is raising awareness to committees, making them aware of issues that are developing within the industry and potential risks. It's not to engage in any sort of scaremongering with them, but it's to tell them, you're here on a committee to represent the best interests of other people, not just yourself, and a way in which you can militate that and discharge that duty is to make these investigations not only for the peace of mind of your stakeholders, but also for your own peace of mind, being an office bearer of that body corporate.
Okay, thank you. Andrew, you got the mic? It's all working? You ready? Yep. That's the mic with the right answers? Okay, fantastic. Can you let us know, how did this product get here? Like, seriously, how are buildings clad in this product now, when we have seen a number of examples where it burns readily?
Well, I suppose, taking a step back, for a number of generations now, we've had FC sheeting and similar products like that put on our buildings, but they tend to perform pretty poorly in our harsh climates, and you get cracking, you get a lot of repairs, ongoing maintenance that you have to carry out.
So, can I just stop you there? FC, fibre cement sheeting, and when you're talking about performing poorly, you mean they're high maintenance?
Ongoing maintenance, high maintenance.
So I'm trying to speak non-engineering terms.
Yeah. But in terms of your ACPs, your claddings, they perform very well in terms of the harsh climate. They weather very well. So you tend, after maybe even 20 years of some of these cladding products on a building, they still look like new. So that's a reason why designers, end users, builders want to use these products, because of the longevity that they give in terms of how well they look and the finish they give to the building, and low maintenance.
And they're easy to build with, yes?
And easy to build with. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Do we know how many buildings have got it? I mean, Simon mentioned earlier that the advice out of the government is very few buildings have it. What's your assessment of what the issue might be in Queensland?
Well, I don't have any numbers, but we are aware that there are a lot of buildings being surveyed and do have cladding issues at the minute, and they're being reviewed by engineers and coming up with appropriate solutions to address those facade issues. In some scenarios, the cladding's been removed. In other scenarios, that's not necessary because of the overall risk assessment. But yeah, there are a lot of buildings out there at the minute. I don't have the numbers.
Okay, so if I said to you, is it a real problem, your answer would be?
Yes, it is for some buildings.
Yeah, and is part of the problem that we don't know where the problem is?
Yeah, and I suppose, in terms of Queensland, we have we've got the Queensland Task Force that's been set up to review buildings and to provide advice to public and to government. And we also have changes in legislation coming about on the 12th of March. So all these things are changing and reacting to the issue that we have.
Okay, thank you. So Peter, when the apartment was sold, people have moved into the apartment. Surely these checks about whether the building was compliant, if the cladding... How do we get to a point where people bought an asset and then they end up with an asset that's got a problem that they weren't aware of before they purchased or moved into the property?
Yeah, okay. Thank you for the question, Ross. Look, Andrew is the fire engineer. I do know that there's checks and balances put in place before an occupier statement's done, before buildings are occupied. And I suppose if I could use, well, they refer to the cladding as to this decade's asbestos disaster, don't they? So if I can use asbestos as an example, there's many people in the room as young as I am that grew up in fibro houses and threw fibro at each other when they were playing in the backyard and whatever, and knew no harm was going to come of it. And then that's all we knew. Now we know otherwise, and we have management systems in place. We have a register for contractors going on site. We have a management plan if an incident should occur, and recommendations if things should be removed or tightly bound and kept in place. So I think if we can use that analogy, that's where we could head forward with the cladding situation.
Okay, thank you. Paul, first question, industry function. We ready? Okay,
really
fantastic.
Could I have the microphone with all the answers, please?
So what advice are you giving to bodies corporate who might come to your office once they become aware that they may have this cladding in place?
In short, we're not. I'd love to say yes we are, but we're not. The reason being is there's so much misinformation out there and there's not enough guaranteed real referrals that we can do. And that's what we're doing at the moment. We're working with stakeholders, we're working with the task force to actually identify what we can put on our websites, and we're also then going to go out on the road for the first time in 4 years to do face-to-face sessions across Queensland, and one of these will be the topical issue that we'll be actually discussing. But at the moment, in short, we're not providing enough information out there for body corporate managers. The intention is that we will be.
Okay, so if a lot is being bought or sold, can they contact your office to find out information? And what duty of disclosure would some of the people who are in this room as strata managers who have people coming into their office on a daily basis to look at the records of bodies corporate when they're doing what duty of disclosure do they have when it comes to whether there's cladding in place or not?
Well, the lawyer in me is not going to answer that.
Okay,
look,
sure.
No, but in seriousness, you should contact our office, and the information services will provide as much information as they can. However, is there a requirement for you to disclose? The short answer is no. The real answer in legal terms is yes, that disclosure is done when people actually purchase properties and people should be providing information. However, it's not identified at this stage to include cladding as one of those topical issues. So the short answer is no, and the long term is the lawyer in me says yes. It will be something, but that's what we're trying to clarify now, so you can be providing your clients and the people that are on the body corporate committees with more information.
Yeah, so it may be a case that the regulation and the legislation hasn't caught up with the events in terms of requiring it as a disclosure, but it may happen in the future.
In the very near future, I believe it will be.
Okay, sure. Simon, what advice is SCA and you in your role as president of the SCA Queensland giving to bodies corporate if they come to your office or the industry association or body corporate managers? What advice are you giving them about the impact on cladding and potential rises to insurance premiums?
Look, Jason touched on this before. A body corporate manager is now moving into the role of a respected professional, and certainly that's our aim to do so through our accreditation pathway and our education programs. I think we're talking about cladding tonight, and we're talking about the terrible events that have happened around the world with cladding. But as a body corporate manager, we know every day there's a number of risks within a body corporate scheme. And unfortunately, this is just adding another one to it. I mean, we've got the glass balustrading in Australia that is non-compliant. We've got the electrical cabling in Australia that is now not compliant. We've got the non-watermarked plumbing products in Australia that are now not compliant. We've got asbestos particle board in Australia that is now not compliant. And in actual fact, it was installed into 1 William Street, where the government's new head office is. So at the end of the day, we are, as body corporate managers, being everything for everyone. However, of course, the answer we're going to give if someone says, I've got this insurance premium, it's gone up because of cladding, should I pay it? I think we'll be saying to pay it.
Okay, so would your advice be that they should do some investigation to find out whether the buildings have the cladding in place or not when it comes to insurance renewal time?
the more tools we can put in the toolbox for a body corporate manager to take those phone calls, I think it's important. Certainly the time frame, as I said, 1994 to 2004, specifically for cladding, I guess that starts to point us towards an area of where we can start looking with our buildings. I know body corporate managers, when they get that phone call, the first place they go to is the plans for the building, or to the recent reports done by professional firms like Solutions in Engineering. But that aside, they'll go to the building reports that have been done by a reputable building report provider. They'll go to the bylaws. They'll do their research. And I think part of that process will also to be researching, okay, is there a certificate of classification for the building? If you go on Google, we've got so much technology available to us now. CHU recently provided a wonderful tool where we can go online and look up a building, drill right down to the building, find out all the details about the building. We can also see if it's made of just brick. So, there's a level of risk assessment. It's not the place of the body corporate manager to do that assessment, though. It's the place of the body corporate manager to reach into their toolbox and provide those details of where they feel the professionals could aid those body corporates.
Okay, thank you, Simon. So, Kim, now's your time in the sun. Just wondering, what's the evidence from your perspective with CHU of the reports that we are all hearing about premiums increasing as a result of what's happened with the cladding?
I guess the first thing I would say is I work for one company, not the entire industry. So I'm really only speaking with one company's perspective. I would say I have heard about some very big premium increases, and I guess it's all relative because we've done some big increases with buildings in regards to this issue, but we haven't done anything like the kind of increases which are the big ones you're hearing about. You're hearing about 200, 300, 400% increases when, probably the biggest one that I've seen come out of our office in Queensland is 60.
Okay,
so
sure.
60 is a big number,
Yep.
but it's not 200.
Okay, so let's say you don't want to have any increase, so just don't ask any questions about it, just do your renewal and you'll be okay.
So I guess different insurers are doing different things. So there's a few main players in this industry and we've all taken vastly different approaches. But what you'll see common amongst all of us is we will be asking specific questions, because to exercise our duty of disclosure requirements, we need to ask an insured, do you have any aluminium composite panelling on the exterior of your building? If yet, what percentage, what product? And if we haven't asked those questions, we can't deny a claim on the basis of its presence.
Okay, so if you ask the questions, but you don't get correct or accurate answers, what happens then if there's a claim, potentially?
So what we would do, so if you came back, body corporate manager, this is fairly common at the moment, where we'll put a question out saying, is there any aluminium composite panelling on the outside of this building? And the body corporate manager will come back and say, yes, there is. And we'll say, what type is it? And that's the pertinent question for us. So there's fire resisting panelling, which isn't as good as concrete, but it's better than polyethylene. The polyethylene cladding is the stuff that when people are having really big increases, that's where it's coming from, and that's where a body corporate may not know, and that's where your testing of the panels comes in. So to determine whether it's one that'll stand up fairly well in a fire, or whether it'll exacerbate a fire to the point where you get really high rate of spread up the side of a building.
Okay, so it's effectively related to how quickly the fire may spread, and therefore the damage that may occur to the building before the fire suppressed or goes out.
Exactly. And so the lacrosse building, there's video all over the internet of the lacrosse building in Melbourne. So you'll know this number better than me, but it's about 8 stories in 11 minutes. So the fire climbed 8 stories in 11 minutes when, if it was a fire resisting panelling, it probably wouldn't have got past that first story. I'm looking at you because I'm thinking you'll know better than me.
Yeah, the type of panel has a big impact on how quick the fire will spread. Obviously, if you've got a panel that's got 100% polyethylene core, then fire is going to spread a lot faster across that in comparison to one that has 70% non-combustible content, for example. And that is all relative.
But Andrew, coming back to what you said earlier on, it does depend upon how the cladding is put in place and what the other fire systems are. Like,
Absolutely, yeah. Like if you've got a cladding that's attached to a concrete wall with no openings in that wall, well, your risk is quite low if it can't spread anywhere. If your building has a sprinkler system in it, has a good detection system, is low rise and doesn't have a lot of occupants in terms of low occupancy loading, then again your risk is quite low. So it depends, and then the type of cladding you have and how many fire breaks you have all impact on that overall assessment. Yeah.
Okay, so it's not a case of cladding bad, no cladding good.
No, exactly.
Yeah,
that's right. So it depends on the percentage of the cladding. How high is that building? So what percentage is on the outside of the building? How many stories is the building? And what type of cladding do you have? And then the subsequent questions we ask are, how's it affixed to the building? Do you have soakers on the outside of the building? So there's a number of variables.
Okay, sure. So bodies corporate able to get building insurance that might exclude the cladding from their policy if the cladding's in place?
So I'm aware that it is possible to buy a product that just excludes fire arising or fire associated with panelling. The question would be, would you recommend it? No, I would not recommend that. It's in contravention to the body corporate legislation. The legislation says you need to insure your building for full replacement value. Now, if you're not insuring your building for fire, when you've got a building that's more likely to be totally destroyed by a fire, you're probably not doing the right thing by your body corporate. It's a very risky committee decision. So that's where, you know, the office bearers really do put themselves at risk. There are a number of products. Most of the products out there, when it comes to strata insurance at the moment, are providing some type of solution for cladding. Whether they're putting excesses, if they're doing high premiums, there's no need to be taking a policy that doesn't cover fire.
Okay, so when you talk about products, you're talking about insurance products,
insurance
not cladding
products.
Sorry,
yeah.
Different products across the panel. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's where, if you've got a building, so you've got a $100 million building, you've got some cladding there, you're either not sure what it is, or you know what it is and it's polyethylene, you could engage an insurance broker. They'll go to the entire market. You know, you don't need to just, you know, deal with the insurer that you've always dealt with. And, you know, I'm speaking from the perspective of the insurer that they've always dealt with. We insure over 110,000 schemes Australia-wide, 15,000 in Queensland. And I'm saying, if you don't like the deal you're getting, get quotes, because it'll either ratify the terms that you're getting, or you'll get better terms.
Okay, sure. So, Jason, what a lot of these questions come down to, who's going to pay, right? So if there's an issue with insurance or there's a fire, there's increase, who pays? Like, who? Most of the people that come and see you, if you boil it back to the simple thing, it's about someone else paying other than the people who believe they should be paying, correct?
Yeah, correct. Part of my role as a lawyer is unfortunately to deliver bad news to people before I can give them good news many years in the future. So before I deliver that bad news, and if they come in with that question, I'll first of all pour them a large, generous portion of scotch, and I'll primarily tell them that the body corporate has the first and foremost statutory duty to keep their building in good condition. And good condition means defect-free. So if you find defective products or any other element of the building that presents as a defect, a body corporate needs to understand that while it has an impulse to point the finger at somebody else to make it their problem, the problem first and foremost sits squarely within their court, and they need to do something about it. It doesn't mean that if you find that you've got defective cladding, that the only solution is to rip it off and immediately put something else there. There are other steps that you can take to mitigate the risk that particular product presents before you then make a compensation claim on them. But ultimately, they need to be guided by proper industry consultants that know what they're talking about to ultimately assist the body corporate to discharge that statutory duty that they're under. But there will be some immediate pain in terms of levies that may need to be raised, or the application of sinking funds towards those immediate works that may need to occur.
So Paul, are you finding that there are many circumstances where people are coming to you where there's a capital expense associated with a body corporate and there's not sufficient funds in the sinking fund?
That's correct, we are, and then that raises the issue then of raising special levies and then arguments about who should pay and what they're doing. That's predominantly why you should contact our office, and that's where also we recommend for the body corporates themselves, for members and things like that, to discuss the matters with us, so we can advise them about how to vote on special levies, what the process is in relation to special levies, and give them that guidance. And ultimately, if they can't agree, that's where we come involved again and actually conciliate the process. We try and negotiate with the parties so they can understand each other's point of view.
But it could potentially be an expensive process if you are affected by the product.
Guaranteed.
Guaranteed.
Guaranteed is going to be. It's going to be a problem for all bodies corporate that are affected. The extra fees, people don't have the money. It's never been thought of before. It's going to cause a lot of angst, and that's where I think if we educate parties properly and actually and get the fear mongering out of the process, I think that'll eliminate some of the issues involved.
Okay, thank you. Now, Peter, there are people in the room wondering about how they might advise the buildings that they work with, or they're on a body corporate committee and they want to know what steps should they take to find out whether cladding is in place and how they can inform their insurer when they're asking the questions like Kim has pointed out they ask. What should they do?
Thank you, Ross. Look, in an ideal world, the cladding would be listed in your building asset register, but 99% of buildings don't have an asset register. So you could try and go back to the developer, the builder, and ask for documentation. I know of one person who did that, who's in the room tonight actually, who was concerned about her townhouse when this first came to light a couple of years ago. And the developer could provide her with the documentation that she needed and to pass that on to the insurers. Failing that, and of course that's a hard thing to do, is to get hold of the developer and to get any documentation from the past. Failing that, you would organise a professional company to come and do a report, say a facade assessment report, to work out if there's any cladding. For a start, if there's no cladding, then that information will be sent off to your insurer, and I'm sure Kimberley would really appreciate this if the managers in the room were firing her emails off saying, yep, thanks for your email, here's the results, there's no cladding, thank you, don't touch the premiums on these buildings. Alternatively, if there is cladding there, well then we've got to look at it. Is it dangerous or is it not dangerous, and how does it fit in with the overall fire safety solutions to the building?
So Andrew, over to you now. Let's say someone engages a company to do a report and they find out that there is cladding in place. How do they go about finding out whether the cladding is an issue?
Yeah, so I suppose it comes down to the competence of the person carrying out that test, first of all, because when you go to site, it's very easy, first of all, to tell if a cladding is an ACP and if it contains some sort of a composite in the panel. If it does, you can carry some small-scale testing in the first instance, which is taking some small samples of about 2 inches in diameter and getting those tested, and from that you can find out what the polyethylene content is in the panel, and from that then you have some more information, and from an engineering perspective you can evaluate what that means in terms of moving forward. Okay, so let me just get this right in my head because it's a bit confusing. First of all, you get someone to come out and have a look and see whether there's cladding. If there's no cladding, happy days. Kimberley's happy, fantastic, no cladding. Insurance premiums are fine. Uh-oh, we've got cladding. What do we need to do then? Because Kim, your organisation, if you say what cladding, if you've got cladding, what you'll be asking. So the main question is it fire resisting or polyethylene? So we want to know the name of the product because there's a number of products. I don't know. I don't know what the name of the product is because developer doesn't exist, builder, no. And if I was a builder and you rang me up and said, can you tell me the type of product you put on my building? Lost in the last fire. Sorry, don't know. Records gone, so flood. There's a number of places that they can go to try. And so I guess from CHU's perspective, what we're asking body corporate managers and brokers to do is to actually attempt to get this information. Don't just throw your hands in the air because it's important. So if you've got cladding on your building and it's fire resisting, you're in a much better situation
if you can prove that it is fire resisting, you're in a position where you can negotiate with insurers instead of polyethylene cladding, where you probably have a limited panel of insurers and they'll tell you what the price is. You know, your bargaining chips are few. So if you have that information, now how you get it, there's a number of very clever people here on this panel, but having it is being armed and makes you able to negotiate where otherwise you wouldn't be able to.
So Andrew, did I hear you correctly to say if you have got cladding in place, it's a relatively easy process to find out whether to examine the cladding and see whether it's going to be fire retardant or not?
Yeah, so I suppose there's a process there. The first thing you would do is probably have a look at some of the documentation. If you have a facilities manager, it's probably talking to them to find out what documentation there is on site in terms of how that building was constructed.
Let's assume there's no facilities managers in the room, and most of the people won't have facilities managers. Dexus and Charter Hall will have all those guys in place, but most body corporates aren't professional, so they won't have those. Yeah? Yeah,
okay. So you can get somebody to go and have a look at the paneling for you. So if you've got paneling on the outside, you can engage someone to go and have a look, a building certifier or a fire engineer or somebody else who is competent in that field to test the panel for you, as I said. But I suppose in the first instance, you can actually just tap the panel, and if the panel feels hollow, it's probably a single ply sheet. If it feels kind of robust, then it probably has some sort of a composite core, and from that then you would do some more investigation.
Okay, so it's like finding studs in a wall, you tap it and
and in terms though of understanding what kind of panel you have in your building, even if you have drawings and the drawing says X type of panel was put on your building, 9 times out of 10 we're finding is that there are scenarios where that product wasn't available when they went to construct, so something else was substituted in its place. So you can't be sure that the product that was specified has actually been installed. Now you can take some panels off and you can look at the back of the panel and it may tell you the name of the product on that panel, but that would only be for certain panels, not all manufacturers do that. So there are ways to get some preliminary information from a preliminary site investigation, but after you've done that, then you can do some testing.
So is it possible that you might have a panel that's like an expensive Louis Vuitton bag that it looks like a Louis Vuitton bag, it feels like one. In fact, when they sell it to you, they get the cigarette lighter and hold it up to prove to you in the market that panel is not flammable. Even if it's got the name on the back, it may not be the genuine product?
Well, if it's got the name on the back, it probably is, because it'll be stamped, but if it doesn't have that stamp telling you what it is, then no. Okay,
righto. So what should they do if they want to protect life and limb, bodies corporate? So when it comes to fire systems and there is a fire, what should everyone in the room be doing with the buildings that they're working with, so that the people who are in the building have got the best chance of surviving the fire?
Yeah, so I suppose the first thing is, do you have a cladding on the outside of your building? So it's establishing that. If you do, then it's talking to your body corporate, it's talking to the facilities manager. If you're not getting the answers from those people that you want, or if they can't explain to you what that building and how it was constructed or what testing they have done, then maybe try to talk to the builder, get some information from there. And if you're still not happy after you've done all that, then talk to a professional to come and do the testing for you.
So even if the building doesn't have cladding, what can bodies corporate be doing to ensure that if there is a fire, people are best prepared and they've got the greatest chance of survival?
Well, your building should be audited every year. There should be an audit being carried out.
So what do you mean by audit? Is that
fire doors should be tested. Are they in place? Are they in working order? Is your fire alarm, has it been tested? Are your smoke detectors working? Are you getting early warning? If you've got a sprinkler system, it would be tested, a number of times per year. So is all that information in place, and has all that stuff been tested to ensure that in a fire event, you're going to get that early warning and you can evacuate safely?
Because those systems are designed not to save the building, but to give people enough time to get out of the building.
Yes, primarily. If you have a sprinkler system, again, it's about containing fire size, allowing the fire brigade to come in to address that fire hazard.
Yep, okay. That's great, thanks. And who looks after the financial investment, Simon, in those circumstances? You need the microphone with the answers. That one's okay.
Could you repeat the question, please?
So I'm just wondering, who looks after the financial investment?
Well, obviously the funds in a body corporate are mutual, so it's going to be all the owners that are going to have to fund these plethora of tests that I'm hearing about tonight, right down to breaking down what exactly the product is. I wonder, and this is a question for Kim, will insurers ever go back out and assess the risks for themselves without relying on a person that has no qualifications to do so?
So I guess there's buildings now where people are saying to us, it's clad, but we don't know what it is. So we do have someone who is going out to those buildings and having a look. And he's been pretty successful with getting good enough answers, but it's not 100% of the time. So there's times where we've had to go back to the body corporate and say, look, we've done our best, but we can't determine to any degree of certainty whether that's the type of product that we need to treat harshly or more softly. But just this is one thing I was sort of hoping to say but haven't yet. So we're concerned about 4% of our buildings. It's not a big number. So that there's 4% where we are going to lengths to try and find out. But there's a lot where we think there might be some cladding there, but it's probably not going to be the difference between that that building being totally destroyed by fire or there being loss of life and not. So that's the big thing.
So it's if cladding's in place, where it is on the building and what type of cladding are the key.
Yeah, if it's a small building, it's less of an issue.
Yep. Okay, thank you. So Jason, I think you might have touched on this earlier on about their timeframes. Like, is it like the clock's ticking that people need to do something about this now before time runs out?
Yeah, earlier I was talking about like a limitation period for a body corporate to claim compensation if it had the ability to do so for a defective building product. But in Queensland, we've got the Queensland Building and Construction Commission, the QBCC, which is a statutory body with the power under legislation to issue directions to rectify defective building work, which could apply in the case of defective cladding. But the time limit there is that the QBCC loses that statutory power 6 years and 3 months after completion of the building work. So that does set a sunset date for a body corporate if they want to get the QBCC involved. Okay.
So what are the legal requirements of the body corporate if they become aware that the non-compliant cladding is in place? What should they be doing?
What they need to do is take reasonable steps to discharge that statutory duty to maintain the building in good condition. And that extends to if you've got a suspicion that there could be something defective, carrying out reasonable investigations to either confirm or remove that suspicion one way or another. If it was confirmed and you do get the evidence that there is a defect there, then it just opens up a whole plethora of issues with respect to legal requirements. They were briefly touched on a little bit earlier by a question that you asked of Paul. It goes to record keeping. So a body corporate, for example, has a duty to maintain its records. That would extend to keeping on record and any of these reports that might reveal building defects. And then that carries on to an implied warranty that a seller of a lot in a community title scheme has to give under the BCCMA. They give a warranty that unless they're disclosed under the contract of sale, there are no latent or patent defects. And the only way that your seller, somebody that's looking to move on one of their lots, would know of a latent or patent defect is if it's been reported on and it appears in the records. So from a risk management perspective from body corporate managers, it's guiding your committees to either confirm or deny those suspicions. And if they are unfortunately confirmed, having an open conversation about them and not trying to bury them because they can have repercussions on other stakeholders in the buildings. But again, if you do find that defect, it's taking reasonable steps to get that defect remedied. A reasonable step is not simply just commencing litigation, as much as I'd like you to. Commencing litigation to try and make somebody else responsible. The primary responsibility does rest with the body corporate, and it's got to take reasonable steps to mitigate the risks that present. And then it's a question of compensation that follows.
And then there's all of the processes, Paul, that often things that come across your desk is where there's disagreement between the various stakeholder groups within a body corporate, how we manage the circumstance, how we deal with the costs, etc.
Correct, but they're not coming across my desk. I've got 30 wonderful staff that are actually talking to you guys all the time, and it's not me. I'm only new to the role since December last year, but effectively the team do that. Information services provide a lot of this in trying to diffuse the situation rather than it does, but if it does come to the fact that people aren't agreeing, then we look after the conciliation side. And I'm actually pleased to say that at least 79% from the latest stats that I've just got for tonight, for 79% of the conciliation processes are actually resolved. So that's a high percentage where parties are arguing over things and then they come to a resolution once they've been informed of the whole information from everybody's perspective.
Okay, that's good news. So Andrew, Peter, anything you'd like to add on that issue about what to do?
Andrew, no? Well, look, I can, speaking from my own experiences from what I've seen come across my email, is a lot of managers sending me emails asking if the building has cladding. Hey, you did an asbestos report, you did an insurance valuation, do you know if it's got flammable cladding? So, well, no. The insurance valuer or quantity surveyor is not an expert in flammable cladding, and that would be a standalone thing that we'd have to go and have a look for. You scroll down the email and they're all been forwarded via a broker. So the brokers are out there hunting up this information. So I would, with my committee, if we had cladding, I'd sit down and say, guys, do we have cladding? Yes or no? If we have got cladding or we think we have cladding, let's get a couple of quotes. Let's get someone out here to have a look at it. If it turns out not to be cladding, great. We can forward this information on to the broker or the buildings insurer. And I think we all have a duty of disclosure. So the more information you can give your insurer, the better. There's no point in hiding stuff from the insurers. You know, when it hits the fan, they're going to find out, and that's when you're not going to get paid out for the damages done.
Can I just step in there? Just one thing. So the duty of disclosure, the onus of disclosure is now on the insurer to specifically ask a question. So if the insurer asks and you say no unknowingly, that's totally different than if you say no and you've got this information in your back pocket. So it's people's best guess, and that's what we're needing to go with on a lot of this stuff. So yeah, an insurance company cannot deny a claim on the basis of something that you weren't aware of and they didn't ask.
Okay, that's good news. Paul?
And there is a lot of parties or a lot of body corporate committees that are now exercising the rights to gain this information from body corporate managers and seeking to get information and documentation. So it's something definitely not worth hiding. It eventually comes out.
Okay, that's great. So Simon, do you think, is the government doing enough about this? Like, it's one of the things which is uniquely Australian that you don't find in a lot of other countries, that whenever there's a problem, the first question is, what's the government doing to fix this?
Can I leave the room before he answers?
It's a fantastic question too, one that I always enjoy answering. Basic education about governments, obviously we've got two that we need to review tonight in Australia. We've got the federal government, who sits on the opposite side of our state government. It's fair to say SCA are never satisfied with any response any government organisation except the Commissioner's Office give us. So we will always fight for the rights of unit owners, bodies corporate and our body corporate managers and our industry suppliers. And we're serious about that. We continue to push back. We had the QBCC legislation changed with the Minister Breney last year or the year before, I think it was, where it was just clearly unfair and gouging body corporates on this very topic of insurance and how it was going to be calculated in a body corporate just because a body corporate's different. I think it's fair to say, state-wise, very happy with our relationship with the current government and certainly moving forward. Could be a bit quicker on our property law reforms, but that's a different minister, so I won't go into that tonight. Federally, for those that aren't aware, I've got to get this right, the Senate Economics Reference Committee Inquiry Response, they've got to have big words for everything. The 64-page document was handed down yesterday, and we've had time to very briefly read through that entire document just to find the wording is that they refuse to institute a ban on the importation of dangerous aluminium cladding into Australia. So, no, I don't think we're satisfied at a federal level. I think we could be doing more to protect Australians in Australia. We pay a lot of taxes and we pay a lot for these guys to look after us and create a society that we can live in, and that's something unique to Australia that in a lot of countries they struggle to have as a right.
Okay, thank you. Sure.
In terms of the government's response, in Queensland, they've introduced a bill to Parliament over 2017 to essentially make anyone that's responsible in the chain of supply of non-conforming building products responsible for the rectification work or even the compensation that might follow, and that's going to be an expanded role on the part of the QBCC. And just to strengthen what Simon said about the SCA's ties to the government, the SCA was invited to give evidence to Parliament on how that particular rollout can be better used within the strata industry. So while that particular introduction into Queensland was complemented by the SCA, we did note that it doesn't solve all of the problems that strata buildings have, but it does go some way to expanding that chain of responsibility if you do have a non-conforming building product. So it's not a body corporate just left with the original developer, designer or builder. It can be somebody else that just imported the product to Australia.
Okay, sure. And Kimberley, what does someone... Kim, sorry, it sounds like you're in trouble when I call you Kimberley. What happens if a building can't get insurance?
CHU are generally providing insurance to anyone with panelling, so we haven't turned anyone away in Queensland since we've formulated a position on this. So I think one of the things that was a bit late to the party was the various insurers, when the Grenfell disaster happened and then you had Four Corners and Compass, insurers were slow to determine their position and then to communicate it. Now that we've formulated our position, we'll be able to provide insurance to the vast majority. I would say it would be very unlikely that the panelling would be the reason that we wouldn't insure that building, but every insurer has a different position. So if you're struggling with either premium or getting insurance, go to a broker.
Okay, thanks, Kim. Jason, let's say best efforts can't avoid litigation, can't get agreement, lengthy process, I'm assuming?
Yeah, it's not an episode of Law and Order that'll finish up before you head out for dinner.
39 minutes once you take the ads out, so they're very clever.
Yeah. No. Unfortunately, it's not quite that quick. You've got to be in there for the long haul, so it is a matter of getting a clear understanding at the outset of any litigation what you're actually fighting for. A lot of people get into these fights and they don't realise what they're fighting for until they're at the doorstep of the court. Sometimes they can get surprised by what they're actually suing for or what the value is proportionate to the legal costs. So if you are facing litigation with respect to rectification of building defects, it's getting the fix costed up front so that you can look at that in proportion to the legal expenditure that you might incur in order to kick that goal.
Okay, that's great. And Paul, some more questions to you. When consumers are coming to your office, what advice are they getting from your officers at the moment when they're asking about this question?
Well, I put it to the crowd, what are you getting told? But effectively what we're trying to do is actually point people to the QBCC, Strata Queensland, and other organisations to actually provide that information at the moment.
Yeah, and what are you doing, what are your plans for what you're doing currently and into the future to, like tonight, coming along and meeting stakeholders? What's the plan?
The plan is at the moment is exactly that. We're gathering in the information so that we can place it on our website, so that you go to one-stop shop to get that information. We're also going to be providing that in articles for multiple areas, as well as our common ground that we actually issue as well for our e-newsletter. And the other thing is we're actually putting in this, once we have more information that is actually real and actually giving you a more informative information, we'll be putting it in our face-to-face sessions. So our face-to-face sessions start in Redcliffe in March, and we work all the way through till September, going across the whole of Queensland.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that.
I should also add, though, that I'd invite anybody that has got the information, including the panellists and things. If you want something shared and you want something information provided, contact our office. That's what we're there for. Give us that information and say, this is what we need from you. And that's what we're gathering at the moment. The information services team is actually trying to gather information and topics, find out where the actual resources are and actually put them in one location. What our biggest thing is about appropriate referrals. We're not going to just palm you off to somebody else. That's not the intention of the office.
Okay, that's great, thanks. And I know that all of the ministers received their letters of writing instructions from the Premier last week. They're not yet available on the Premier's website, but they're all there. I'm just wondering whether your minister has given you pretty clear directions about what they're expecting from you and your office with regards to the Strata community.
Not at this time, nothing from the Minister's office directly to me at this time.
Okay, that's great, thank you. I've finished the questions that we had planned for the panel, and now I think that it would be appropriate if we actually passed the microphones out through the audience to see whether there's any questions that people may have that they don't feel have been adequately answered or asked. Can I ask, if you have a question, if you can wait till one of the microphones come to you, and there's a question down the front here. If you could stand up, let us know your name and where you're from, and that might provide some context to your question.
Thanks, and my name's Chris Wybon. I'm from the Fire Protection Association. So it's a very interesting discussion and a lot of good viewpoints. But one question, and it's sort of related to the cladding issue, but a little bit more broader, is that those who have actually read the interim report from Jane Booth Hackett from the Grenfell fire would understand that it's not actually as simple as cladding on a building. It's actually, and her words were, the system and the process of what's written down versus what's actually done is completely not fit for purpose. And I think if you look at the Australian regulatory system, it cuts very close to home. It's a very, very similar system. So, and it sort of goes similar to the comment beforehand about banning, you know, ACP. It's not about banning a product, because today's ACP is tomorrow's sprinkler head, tomorrow's, you know, illegal lining material or something else. So it's not about the actual product itself, it's actually about the system and the mechanism that we all work under. So I guess my question to the audience, to the panel is, what do you think needs to be done to our regulatory systems and our training and our accreditation systems to ensure that we don't have a Grenfell style fire in Australia?
Okay, thank you. So Andrew, do you, or Simon, you want to?
Oh, look, I could start off on that. I think it was actually this very hotel last July. I was a part of the non-conforming, non-compliant products summit, at which we had just about every head of department and union in the room. And I think at the end of that, we came away with leaving it, unfortunately, down to the end point, which is the retail supplier. Look, that's worked with toys, with the poisonous paint, can't think what it is. But it certainly worked in a number of industries. But I think with the building industry, and I'm no expert on the building industry, I think we've got to get that supply process right. If the government, as they've said as of yesterday, that they're not going to stop it coming across the borders, then it's going to be in Australia. So somewhere along that supply chain, there's got to be responsibility. And at the moment, it's going to end up with the poor retailer that sells it. The unions, thankfully, in Queensland have said they're not going to put it up on the buildings, but again, they've got to know what the product is.
Andrew, do you have a comment?
Yeah, so I suppose just in terms of Grenfell, you had a single stair in a very tall, high-rise building. You had cladding that had some fire stopping with lots of gaps in it. You had an open stair that smoke was able to spill into. You didn't have a sprinkler system, and you had a defend-in-place strategy. So there's lots of things that are totally different to the way we do things in Australia. For example, high-rise buildings would generally have sprinklers. We would generally have at least 2 stair cores. And all those things are of benefit in terms of the overall risk when assessing your building in particular. In terms of products coming into Australia, I know they're trying to tighten down on that chain in terms of being able to see where it comes from, what the product's been tested to, etc., etc. We do have changes to legislation coming in on the 12th of March, so the Building Code of Australia, the NCC, will be changing. This brings in play the requirement for full-scale testing and lots of these types of ACPs to give you a better understanding of how it performs on buildings, and allows a more performance-based approach to be taken when evaluating cladding products.
Okay, thank you. So really it is about looking at the totality of the fire system. It's not just about cladding, no, I'm safe, cladding, yes, I'm not safe.
Yeah, it's the overall package, because if you've got a lot of things that go wrong in a building and you've got one fire, such as happened in Grenfell, but if you've got a fire here in a building, you may not have the same outcome. For example, there have been a lot of cladding fires across the world where we've had sprinkler systems in the building and the fire spread quite fast up the outside, but yet the building, people have evacuated safely and there hasn't been any loss of life or serious injury. So, it's about understanding the overall risk.
So checking the sprinklers are working, doing a whole bunch of things on an annual basis, that the regime is actually working as it should be, is as important as finding out whether there's cladding in place.
It's definitely part of the process. It's not the overall process, but it's part of the strategy.
Okay, sure.
And something that hasn't been raised is, we're talking here about new buildings versus refurbished buildings as well. This is more of a risk in a refurbished building where we're trying to make it look pretty, and we're trying to hide the stuff that looks ugly, versus one that's being built to code today, because it is getting checked. It does have the appropriate fire maintenance systems in place.
Okay, sure. Question down the back.
Yes, my name's Gina. I'm from a company called Plus Passive Fire. So as you've mentioned tonight, a lot of the Grenfell disaster was about the cladding, but as Chris up the front said, it is a lot to do with the compartmentation in a building. So if there had been proper compartmentation in that building, the fire would not have spread nearly as fast. So we're finding, as a part of that complete system, sprinklers, everything else like that, now the cladding is highlighted, but no one is actually focusing on the passive fire issues that are in a building. It is in the legislation. There are no regulators really monitoring it, but it is there. You should have annual inspections of your building in relation to passive fire, and no one's actually doing it. It's a very misunderstood or not understood area of the legislation, and I think you should be talking about that tonight.
Okay, thank you. Another question down the back.
Just following on from the previous speaker in relation to passive fire, I'm a fire safety advisor, and for clients, and many of them body corporates, undertake to do their occupier statement, which needs to go to Queensland Fire and Emergency Services. I really struggle to get the passive fire documentation. I know what it means, and I have to use other means to try to convince people or convince organisations and companies what passive fire really means. And for me to put it in an occupier statement and certify it to be correct from those who are certifying it and or maintaining it in accordance with the the Queensland Development Code, I really struggle to convince body corporate. I struggle to convince many of our well-known builders in the industry what is passive fire, and what I, as a fire safety advisor, need to then put on the occupier statement to send to the fire commissioner. I acknowledge that ACM is an issue. I acknowledge that there are very many sources of ACM, those being used for signage or misused for cladding. But I believe passive fire is a real issue that body corporates should really know about.
I think that you've
you.
given a pretty good explanation of that just now. Are there any more questions? One down the back. Oh, no. You have to wait, Paul. Name, where you're from, then your question.
Robert, and I am on 4 body corporate committees. it's all been about cladding, but Simon mentioned that there's some glazing, balustrading that is not compliant. Now, there are a lot of buildings in Brisbane that are 40, 30 years old that have these balustradings, and some of them are enclosed. Is there anything in the system that is requiring those older buildings to be brought into compliance? Because it was also said that we have a statutory responsibility. And in the event that there is a requirement, what time frame, going back to the cladding time frame, would that be seen to be?
So I might, perhaps Jason might be best, but my understanding is that the building code's not retrospective in terms of compliance. So if you're not making refurbishments or there's not danger, but I'm now going to hand over to the people that have the answer microphones rather than the one just standing up. So Jason.
All right, I hope it's this one. No, but you're right, Ross. The codes don't apply retrospectively such that if the powers that be in today's age say, well, we should have a balustrade to X height, that it requires every other building in Queensland to lift their balustrades up to that particular height. You can imagine the enormous building costs that Bodies Corporate would be exposed to whenever those codes were updated if that was the case. But subject to the extent of building work or the refurbishment that could be occurring to a particular building, it may trigger the need to update the entire building to ensure compliance with particular parts of the code. But that doesn't do away with the problem altogether. As I've been trying to hammer home, there's this duty of care, legislative duty, that applies to Bodies Corporate with respect to common property and maintaining it in good condition, in defect-free condition. So if it was the case that you couldn't get a risk assessment pass because your balustrading is so old and it's so outdated that it actually presents a real risk to people in there, then that may trigger that statutory duty to maintain that balustrade in good condition. But to hopefully give you a pointed answer, it's not the case that a body corporate would have to update elements of their building that don't comply to today's code, but it doesn't mean that that it's necessarily safe. It's a matter of taking advice on a particular concern that a committee might have to alleviate their concerns and mitigate the risks that they could be exposed to.
Another question down the front here.
Thanks. Matthew Savage from Capital Body Corporate. Someone mentioned 1994 to 2004. Did I hear that right? As being the risk
You did.
time. What happened in 2004, if anything, if it's still available now?
They probably put it into storage like they did asbestos, and then we found out the dates didn't matter. You can't rely on those dates is what I'm saying.
No.
My jokes aside, we thought we'd cleared asbestos out of the system, and then it was found in storage and found to be being used again in buildings. So those are guide dates of when the product was available for retail sale in Queensland is my understanding and my advice on that matter. So that gives you, I'm just trying to give you a time frame as a body corporate manager to add that to the other things that you'll need to look at ultimately to get an outcome.
And second question is there a particular document, or is there a fact sheet or something that you would recommend as being a place we can refer committees if the Commissioner's Office doesn't have a position on it yet? And the information seems to be all over the shop from what I can see. So, like, do each of you have a top one place where you would be referring random questions rather than sort of guessing at answers?
From the prep that I was doing in anticipation of tonight, I think you're all going to be emailed a wonderful document package which should contain some fact sheets as a helpful reference point. But the point that I'd like to hammer home there is that you need to take specific advice for the specifics of your building. We can't just rely upon generic principles and hope to interpret them for the buildings within our portfolio. It's a matter of, as that trusted advisor role, identifying that there could be an issue and pointing your committees into the right direction.
I just add that on the back of your lanyard there's a flow chart, so that would help you, Matthew. That would help you with if you have a look at the flow chart, and you'd be able to send that out to your committees as well. But I'm sure we could package something up and get that out to you.
Question over there in the back.
Thanks, Ross, and thanks for doing a brilliant job at wrangling this really interesting topic. One of the issues that we had this forum was to try and get a handle on, is there a problem, what the scope of it might be. And at the beginning, people sort of acknowledged, well, it's a big problem, but we don't know the numbers. And it was left at that, except with the one stat that perhaps 4% of buildings are affected. Now, if that's correct, and it's just a number stated at a conference, that would mean that in Australia there's probably 12,000 buildings affected, which means by the ratio of buildings in Queensland, it's probably somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500 buildings. The average number of people in a building in Australia is 10, but in cladding buildings we can probably think it's more. So perhaps this means that something like 300, 400, 500,000 more people own units in affected buildings, and perhaps double that number live in units in affected buildings. I ask in the panel, firstly, can we extrapolate and actually come to those sorts of numbers? Because maybe that mathematics doesn't work. But as a financier, I'm always trying to work out what is the scope of the issue. And if those are the numbers, isn't that significant?
Kim, I think you're...
I wouldn't mind putting a clarification around my 4%. So 4% of buildings is buildings where CHU have identified, we think that this is a building which is built after 1995, is bigger than 4 stories. 1995, bigger than 4 stories, and is probably bigger than $10 million. And so that's what we're looking at as a focus, to say we've only got limited resources as an insurer. So where are we going to focus it? We're going to focus it there, because that's where the big dollars are going to be come claim time.
Yeah, so you've done an assessment of the buildings because you have all the information about size, height, etc. in your policies. You've drawn a spreadsheet, you've done a sort top to bottom, and you reckon about the 4% at the top are the ones that you're focusing on.
Yeah, so they've got to meet all those criteria, and they're the ones where we're going to be asking specific questions, and we're going to be needing answers to those questions prior to providing insurance. So that number for me is a big insurance number. It's not probably the number that you're looking for to determine the size of the issue.
Okay, thank you. Is it?
Are you talking strata residential only? What about commercial? People live in town. Yeah.
So that would be both. Yeah.
The early numbers last July that were spoken by government when they'd identified 40 through their task force, the majority were actually government buildings, a couple of residential that they were dealing with directly at that point in time. I tried to seek clarification on that today, but they gave the broad statement that there was not many they had to go back and revisit.
Okay, one more question.
Just to clarify what you said, Kim, so as body corporate managers, if we were looking at our portfolio, is there a certain story level that we need to not worry about?
So where we're going to be specifically asking questions, so this is where, unless we get an answer to this question, renewal advice won't come out. So we need to get some kind of answer, even if the answer is we need to assume it's this. We need to satisfy that for ourselves before we can proceed, and that's buildings bigger than 3 stories.
So QBCC insurance cuts out at 3 stories as well. So that should be noted if there was a new build.
Okay, I'm conscious of the time, and I'm also conscious of the fact that we have a bottle of sparkling wine and some gold class movie tickets down the back that we need to do a draw for. Just as Kathleen brings up the box with the cards, and there'll be a shout soon for redraw, because you'll need to jump to your feet quickly if it's you, because 15 seconds after the name comes out, if you haven't claimed it, it's getting drawn again. Do we like this person? So the winner is Mark Stewart. Oh, redraw? No. Oh. He's not here. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for coming along this evening, but I would also like to ask you to join me in thanking our panellists Peter Berney, Simon Barnard, Jason Carlson, Andrew Brennan, Kim Jonnson and Paul Ramage. Thank you.